Welcome to Tampa Home Talk with your host, native Tampa real estate girl, Katrina Madewell, a full-time, passionate, out-of-the-box thinker, love for home ownership kind of realtor with over 21 years of combined mortgage and real estate experience. Tune in every week at this time for expert advice on everything you need to know about home ownership, finance, maintaining great credit, building wealth, and making your everyday life better, and how you can be financially successful today and tomorrow. Remember, love where you live or let Katrina fix it. Now, here's your host of Tampa Home Talk, Katrina Madewell.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon on Tampa Home Talk. We are bringing you a very special Halloween edition to today's show. And there's a number of things over the years that kind of prompted the idea for the show. But the long and the short of it is I thought we would talk a little bit about ghosts. And I thought I would talk about ghosts in houses. And we have a special guest that's joining us a little bit later in the show today. Roy Condrey is one of the CEOs over at diedinhouse.com, because we've gotten that question, of course, many times over the years. So from a real estate perspective, and I thought a great place to start the show, and we've gotten this, right? We've represented a lot of different deputies and law enforcement officers over the years, and they've, I had one guy actually, his name's Claudio, I'll never forget him. He was a deputy, had been a deputy for a long time, and was adamant about the fact that he wanted to buy new. And I think that's because law enforcement officers see so many things, right, in these houses on a day-to-day basis that they just kind of have their own superstitions and that kind of stuff. And it's just interesting to see the biggest of men and people, that aren't usually scared of anything. Sometimes this topic might freak them out a little bit. So I thought I would kick off the show this afternoon and tell you about my own personal experiences. And then we're going to share with another guest that has some experiences also. And then we'll also chime in with Roy and get some information about how his company can help you if you're in the market to buy a home. So going back, and it's interesting. So sharing a couple stories that I can relate to personally, and I know people might be listening to Tampa Home Talk right now thinking, oh, well, I don't believe in ghosts, and, that's all make-believe, and haunted houses are this and that, and the ghost tours, and just all these little things we hear. But I'll tell you that as a kid, and I'm trying to remember exactly what age I was, but I think probably around 12 years old, maybe, possibly a little younger. Yeah, I was probably selling like something from school or Girl Scout cookies or something like that. But I remember there was this one house down the street from where my family had lived forever. My grandparents lived there. They built the house new in the 50s, and my mom grew up in that house. And so later my husband and I bought it. And long story short, I was out selling, whatever I was selling as a kid. Keep in mind, probably 10 to 12 years old. This one house, I remember people always moving in and out of it, like nonstop when I was a kid. They would move in, move out, move in, move out. Like nobody would stay in that house long. And so one day I go up to this house. I wasn't sure if anybody lived there or not. I thought it was empty, but I wasn't really sure. I was just, going to every door like we did when we were kids. And so I knock on the door and I ring the bell and I wait there a couple times. And this particular house had, a regular single door. And on both sides of the door, you have the glass panes that you can see through and, in and out of the house. And so I'm standing there and, naturally as a kid, I'm looking in the house to see if anyone's there. I notice there's no furniture, but I ring the bell again. Well, the next thing you know, I see this shadow, like literally a hazy, looking figure walk down the hallway, stop right in front of the front door, do a 90-degree turn, and literally start walking towards the front door. And it was crazy. It freaked me out. It still gives me, goosebumps. It makes the hair on my arms raise just talking about it. But I can tell you that when I went home that day and I was kind of freaking out about it and told my mom I had seen a ghost in the house, she says, we probably need to talk about this. And I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, when I was a kid, I went to babysit so-and-so's kid one day and I couldn't stay there. I had to go home with the kid until the parents came home to pick up their daughter. And I said, what do you mean? She goes, that house is definitely haunted. She said, and as a matter of fact, when I was a kid, she said there was somebody brutally murdered in that house. And so we believe that it's her spirit that's unrested in the house. And ironically enough, years later, since I lived in the house down the street, the people that have lived in it now have been there for a very long time. Their name is Andy and Yvonne. And I said, hey, I have a curious question for you because I saw this when I was a kid, but, I was a kid and I'm just wondering, have you ever seen anything in your house or have you ever experienced anything? And they said, oh, yeah, there's a lady. She lives in our house. And as a matter of fact, we found out later that she was murdered here, but, she usually stays calm and pretty quiet and we don't hear anything from her until, if we're having a spat with our son, Nick. And at the time he was a teenager. So you know how that goes, the whole parent-teen, fights. And long story short, they're like, yeah, she'll move stuff around and pace the hall at night and all this stuff when their house is a little bit disruptive. So I thought it was just kind of interesting because that's the only time that I personally have ever seen anything. But I will tell you, selling as many properties as we do and helping as many families as we help, there was a couple other instances that I wanted to share with you. And one time, I was actually in this townhome in Lutz, and ironically, both of these homes that I'm going to share the story with, they're both bank-owned properties. So the first house, this one house I went in, and this was, these were years apart, but this one house that I went in was a townhome, and it, nothing pretty about it because it was a vacant bank-owned property. They're usually not jazzed up in any way, although sometimes the banks are doing that these days. So it's a townhome, and I literally get the eeriest feeling walking in here, and as I'm walking in the house, I start walking up the stairs, and literally the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The hair on my arm stood up. I just had a very uneasy feeling and proceeded to walk up the stairs and just got the weirdest feeling. And the longer I stayed in there, the worse it was. And I had to take off. And it wasn't until I left the house that I think the hair on my arms finally settled down and stopped standing on end. And then the last time I had another client, these people were actually long-term clients of mine. They've moved in and out of the state a couple times. And so we've helped them on numerous occasions, and thank goodness it was them with me, because if it was anybody else for this experience, I probably would have thought I was crazy. But this property, you could tell, had been vacant for a while, goodness knows how long. So we're in there, we're walking around, everything's normal. I had looked at several properties, we're talking about the house, and I don't even know what we were talking about at the time, but I remember we were standing in the middle of the master bathroom, which was a pretty good sized house. So the bathroom was pretty big. And we're standing there, and the best way I can explain to you what happened, because I didn't see anything this particular time, but the best thing I can describe it as, if you've ever taken a flight somewhere and you've been on an aircraft and that aircraft suddenly experienced some type of turbulence and it drops altitude like several thousand feet and you get that little drop in your stomach, kind of like the same feeling when you get on a roller coaster or something like that. I had that feeling, and it was just so bizarre. It came out of nowhere, standing there talking, and then boom. And I just felt like maybe something rushed right through me. I wasn't sure what it was. But the people that I was with, one of them, the lady, was she's very in tune to her surroundings, and they got as freaked out as I did. And we just said, oh my gosh, I don't know what happened. We got to go. We got to get out of here now. So we left, we locked up quickly and just took off. And that was pretty much my experience with supernatural, paranormal, whatever. And again, the only time I ever saw that is as a kid. And I've got a couple stories about my younger daughter, but I'm going to save those for a little bit later because I want to introduce our guest. And so our special guest for today's show is Roy Condrey. He's one of the president and CEOs of DiedInHouse.com. And we had a chance to talk before the show, so I got to figure out what their vision was and the idea and starting it and all that stuff. Welcome to the show, Mr. Roy. How are you?
I'm doing well, Katrina. Thanks for having me on.
So can we start for just a minute, because I know this is going to tie into the stories that I shared and some of the stories that my other guests are going to share later, but your website and your company is DiedInHouse.com. And so the purpose of this site is to disclose to a buyer that's interested in buying a property if someone has ever died in the house, right? That's the whole premise of your company and your site?
Correct. Our intent was to provide a service to help people find out if someone's died in a home before they buy or rent. It's turned out to be a little bit more. There's some other people that are interested, but that was the intent of the company.
So how long has your company been around?
We've been around a little over a year. We launched in June of 2013.
And so I'm curious, because it's such a unique company, right? It's like one of a kind. It's not like you're opening a green veggie stand, right? You're actually searching a lot of different places to get information if someone's died in a house. Can you talk about why you would start a company like that? Like, what was the purpose behind it? How did that all come about?
Yeah, well, I own a few rental properties on the side, And I went off to Afghanistan, and I handed the properties over to a property management company. And then when I came back, I just left it that way with the property management company. It's so easy that way. Either way, I live in South Carolina, and one of the houses, the air conditioning went out in the middle of the summer. So I gave the tenant my phone numbers because I wanted to get the air conditioning in and not to have her call 2 or 3 people just to get an answer. So I put the air in, and about 3 months later, she texted me in the middle of the night and said, she goes, "Did you know your house is haunted?" So I texted her back and I said, tell me more what's going on. And as I was sitting there waiting for her to reply, I just started thinking, I don't know the history of this house. I don't know if it was a murder home or if someone's ever died in this house. So the next day I got online and I looked for a home genealogy site or diedinhouse.com and didn't find one. But I found tons of people asking the same question. And the advice I found on some realtor sites were to ask the realtor, ask the seller, ask your neighbors, and check government records. So I started down that path on that property. I didn't find anyone that's died in that house. By the way, that process is easier said than done. It's very time-consuming.
Absolutely. And like you said, there's not a lot of resources out there. And it's, the interesting thing, I know you're in South Carolina and we're here in Florida. So, the one thing that I just want to chime in, and you can also share a little bit on this too, because I know you've done some homework on it, but, every state has different laws for what's required when someone dies in a home, if you have to disclose it, if you don't have to disclose it. And here in the state of Florida, there's nothing that says it has to be disclosed if anyone has ever died in the house, whether they're, brutally murdered, whether they have passed in their sleep, regardless, there's no law that states that. And as a matter of fact, the way Florida Association of Realtors has a position of such that, they would prefer that we didn't even comment on that as agents and left whatever, like the seller wanted to disclose at that. And so, even our seller's disclosure statement, we don't even put our pin on that document. We literally hand the blank document, and we do a lot of stuff via electronic signatures. But that's one thing that we still require the seller to manually fill out in ink, sign, and return. And so, we leave it up to them. And I know for sure there's a space in the bottom part of that disclosure that says, is there anything else that materially affects the value of the property? Which is another whole story in itself, right? But go ahead. I want you to continue and then talk about what you know as far as states.
Right. So absolutely. So, so I go out there, didn't find anybody died in that property, but I found out that a married couple died in another property of mine. So I was like, well, I felt that should have been disclosed, so I looked up the law, disclosure law in South Carolina, and there in South Carolina, the law states if the buyer asks and the seller knows, then the seller should tell the truth, but if not, no legal action can be held against them. So, so then I was like, interesting. So then I also found tons of stories of this happening to people, where a property, let's say a murder-suicide happens, what have you, the house sits there, no one buys it, the home depreciates, it goes up for auction, or someone buys it under value, and whether they know or not, but usually they don't find out until after they move into the home, and then later they discover it. I can go into some of those stories later. But so I found out there's only 3 states that really have a law, and that's California, being 3 years from the closing, you have to disclose any death. Then Alaska and South Dakota is 1 year for murders and suicides. There's 15 states that have the same law as South Carolina. If the buyer asks and the seller knows, tell the truth, but no legal action can be held against you. The other 32 states, they don't even touch it. And what these properties are called are stigmatized properties, which I know you know that. And they say that a death in a home is not a material fact. So I'm not the brightest guy in the world, so I went and looked up what's material fact. And part of that definition is anything that can impact the buyer's decision. So for me, for instance, not too proud to say, I listened to your stories earlier, and I'm one of those guys. Look, I've been in the military for a long time and went to Afghanistan. But guess what? I'm not too proud to say I don't want to buy a home that there was a murder-suicide, because I have my own superstition. But
I got to tell you, Roy, before I was an agent, I bought my first house. And I got to tell you, I think because I saw that ghost as a kid, it was probably one of my biggest fears, was that I would buy a home and somebody would have died in that house and there would be a ghost. And I just couldn't live in a house that had a ghost, personally.
Right. Well, that's my personal opinion. There's different groups of people that use our service, and there's the people that believe in the paranormal. And 1/3 of Americans, there's an AP poll put out in 2007 that said 1/3 of Americans admit to believing in ghosts. So what I say is, okay, that's how many admit it. How many don't? Because as soon as you start talking about your superstitions or what have you, whether it be true or not, you're labeled as crazy. and I see this all the time, but I've had my own experiences, and I know others have, but there's that paranormal community that just doesn't want to buy a property with that. Then there's a group of people that may not believe in the paranormal. They just don't want to live in a home that has a negative or, a horrible history like that, So imagine buying, Andrea Yates' home and then later finding out she drowned all of her children in this home, or in John Wayne Gacy's where he buried 20, he buried 28, murdered and buried them there in the crawl space. So that information, no matter. Well, let me finish that. So that's paranormal. Then there's the negative energy. Also, there's a feng shui community. They believe in that. Mm-hmm. Then there's the home value side of it, where it hits you in the pocketbook. There's an appraiser. His name's Randall Bell in California. He's been called in for all the big events, O.J. Simpson, Katrina, the trade centers, to appraise these properties. And he says that a death in a home, especially a violent death, can impact the property value more than 25% and take it 50% longer to sell. So I'm not saying. So
I'm curious. It's interesting that he says, especially a violent death, and right. That would lead one to believe that a violent death may have a spirit that's left behind. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what causes someone to be haunted, but yeah, I guess so. If it is true that a house can be haunted, then a violent death, you're basically taken out of this world a little faster than planned, So I don't know what it all entails. I guess one day we'll figure that out. But.
So my producer's giving me a quick look. We got to take a really quick break, Roy. We'll be back in just a second for the remaining part of Tampa Home Talk. But make sure you stick around, because when we come back, we have a bunch more fabulous information to share. We'll be back in a minute.
Hi, this is Melissa Rogers, owner of SEC Inspection Services. We're so glad that you're listening today, that we're offering you a special deal. If you're purchasing a home, you can have $50 off your full home inspection. And if you're already a client of ours, we're offering 10% off of any other service that we offer. Just give us a call at 727-786-4663 or visit us on the web at secinspection.com.
Aaron Davis here, owner of Hillsborough Title, serving all of Tampa Bay. Our service strength and knowledge make us different. From Polk County to the Gulf, Pasco to Manatee, Tampa Bay, we've got you covered. Visit us on the web at thebesttitle.com. That's thebesttitle.com.
Welcome back. You're listening to Tampa Home Talk, this week's special Halloween edition. And our special guest joining us for today's call is Roy Condrey, one of the CEO and presidents of DidenHouse.com. And we were sharing in the first part of the show, which, by the way, if you missed any part of it, I know you're going to want to check it out. So pop on over to TampaHometalk.com. And we are also on Facebook and Twitter and across the web. Just look for Tampa Home Talk, and all of our shows are available via a podcast. So if you missed the first part of our show, we were talking about my personal experiences that I've had, encounters with paranormal, as well as different things that I've maybe not saw but felt in a property, and if a death in a property actually impacts the value. And I think that was right about where we left off, Roy.
Yep, and you're asking me, does that make it haunted or not? I can't answer that question.
Well, it's kind of like even with the appraiser. You mentioned that an appraisal is an opinion of value. So you're going to have one appraiser appraise the house that gets one value, and a different appraiser that will appraise the same home and get a completely different valuation, because it's an opinion of value.
Right. And the information, not everybody cares. I feel that there's people that don't care, but it's just, in the research I've done, for instance, right before the show, I looked up a property. I just grabbed one, and it was in Pennsylvania. In 2011, there was a murder-suicide. The home was valued at $235,000. It took it 13 months to sell, and it finally sold for $181,000. That's 23% right there. discount. But I could go in there and find another one, and it's sold for the comps, But that's the purpose of the site. Is one of the stories that kind of galvanized me to create this when I was doing my research was in Pennsylvania. This lady, her and her husband and family lived in California. Her husband passed away. She decided to move her children and her up to her family in Pennsylvania. She buys a home for $600,000. About 2 months after living there, our kids were told there was a murder-suicide in the house. So it happened.
And this is after 6 months of being in the home?
A couple months. I think the article says 2 months. It's on ABC News. So she's in their house for 2 months, and the children find out there was a murder-suicide there. So she's not comfortable with that information. So what happened was the murder-suicide occurred. The home depreciated $450,000. The people bought it as an investment. They didn't disclose it to her purposely, and because they admit to that, because there's no law in Pennsylvania stating they had to. And, they bought it for $450 and sold to her for $600. Well, she takes it to the Supreme Court, finally goes to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, and they ruled against her, saying, hey, there's no law. We recognize you lost $150,000, but there's no law stating they had to disclose that information, so you're basically stuck in a home you're not comfortable with, And I just don't see that as fair in those cases, and I believe this information is important to a lot of people, and it's just been proven, and it happened to me, and it was important to me. And I believe people should be presented this information before they make the decision to buy or rent. And
the interesting thing too, Roy, is as being an agent and someone that represents buyers, and of course this kind of stuff comes up now because people talk about ghosts and spirits and all this stuff, right? For Halloween, it's our special Halloween edition. But I think in the general course of the year, most buyers, they're so excited and they have so many other things to think about when they're looking for a property, especially in our market where properties are still going very fast. I mean, if they show well and they are priced right, they're going to sell very quickly. Mm-hmm. And most buyers have a lot of other things on their mind, like the contract and the home inspections and the loan and all these other things that you have to do when you get a property that I think a lot of people aren't even thinking about that at the time they buy it.
I agree. You're on a high. These homes are all decorated and they're all refinished and everything, and they're so nice. And you walk in and you're on such a high. You don't even stop to think about that question until you move in. You may hear a creak in the night or something. So I just feel that information should be presented up front and allow that person to decide for themselves if they're comfortable living in that situation.
I think the crazy part is, and I know before we had to take a break, you were talking about how a third of America said, yes, they believe in ghosts. And then you said the rest of them either don't want to admit it for fear of being labeled as crazy, right, or whatever. But I think, and my personal belief is, unless you see something like this, you probably you'd never believe it. And it's just, I think it's interesting that I've never personally seen anything other than the time I was a kid. Like as an adult in these other two properties, there was definitely something going on in there. But I think if I had just experienced that as an adult without seeing the prior ghosts that I had seen when I was a kid in a home where someone was murdered, if I hadn't had that experience, I don't know that I would believe in ghosts either, right?
Right. Well, that's not necessarily all ghost situations, because you could, like Jody Harris's house, or not, Travis Alexander's house. Jody Harris murdered him. The tenants that bought that before it got them into the media, they bought it and they weren't aware of the murder in there. And today they say people drive by and just scoff at that property, especially during October. So that's something. You may not believe in ghosts. You may not care if there was a murder there. But you don't want people just driving by and scoping your house out, being a tourist attraction.
Right.
So there's all kinds of reasons for this information to be important to people.
So we have another guest that also is joining us. I'm going to bring her in because she has some other experiences herself. And again, it's my belief, unless you physically see a lot of this stuff with your own eyes, it's really hard to wrap your brain and your head around how any of this could happen, right? Barbara, we have you on the line. You there, Barbara?
Yes, I'm here.
I know you and I were talking about some experiences that you've had in life with regards to the supernatural, and I was hoping you could share with us today. We have Roy Condrey also on the line with us. He's the president of diedinhouse.com, and we were talking about how that's what their company does, is research and homework of someone's past in a house.
Oh, cool. Yes, I am totally into this stuff. People that do not believe this are crazy because if they just pay attention, stuff's happening around them, I guess, that they just don't notice. But I've got a couple of good stories for you.
So what do you got first?
Okay, first of all, I'm in the grocery store I'd say about 4 or 5 months ago, and I'm looking up on the top aisle. Now, remember, in the old days, the aisles would go straight through where the canned goods was, where, you could reach to the other side. Well, now they have the metal things back there. Well, there was one other couple with their small child in the aisle with me, nobody else. Well, all of a sudden, the cans just started flying off that top shelf beside me. And the man's jumping up and down going, "Did you see that? Did you see that? It's a ghost, blah, blah, blah." The manager had to come over and calm him down. And I went and looked on both aisles beside us and out front, and there was hardly anybody in that store that day. And he had said he had previous experiences and stories that the customers were telling him. But he never took it really seriously, but he knew me, so he knew I was not making this up. Well, I've heard on a lot of my ghost stories, I watch all that stuff, that if you've got to, sometimes they follow you home. So when I walked in the house, I just said, "Please do not, if you followed me home, you're welcome if you're nice. If you're not nice, you have to leave, but do not hurt my animals or my family or anybody like that." Oh, within 20 seconds, my bowl that has a water pitcher in it, an old-time thing, just hit the ground, and it's on carpet. It's hit it before. It never broke. But this time it broke in a million pieces. And then it was like the feeling I had around me was gone, so they left. Whoever it was somebody kind of ornery, I guess. But that's one of them. That got me pretty good that day.
And so this one's at a grocery store.
Yeah, right through the grocery store. I had perfect strangers verifying it. They were hollering so loud, we had to calm them down. Scared them to death.
I bet.
And like I said, I'm sure it followed me home that day, but at least it didn't stay. I live around a lot of graveyards, so I can feel things pass in and out of this house, and my animals kind of let me know. You know how they can sense things, that we can't anyways.
I've heard that before, too.
But one other time, now this was many years ago, my girlfriend had such a problem with a ghost that, it used to shove her down the stairs. It used to do all kinds of things. I spent the night there one night, and we were playing cards, so we spent the night because my girls were real little then. And in the middle of the night, something touched me. I can't explain it to you. It's like it goes inside your body and all the way up the side of me. It was very invading, I guess you'd want to call it. But I woke my husband up right away, and he is not a believer. But earlier that day, we also showed him where the knobs were turning on the stove by themselves. And the dog would do like the dog on Poltergeist, stand up in the corner, and all of a sudden it's doing tricks. Well, later on, she got the authorities out at USF for paranormal, and they came out to the house. She also called her church. The priest and the 2 nuns could not even get in the front door before they got violently ill. They ran. They totally ran to their cars, and they ran out of there. Well, they did a lot of investigation. I didn't hang around that day. They did a lot of investigation, and they found out that it was. She had a very bad one in there, and it was her first husband. They got married when they were 16, and I guess he was very violent in life, and he died on his motorcycle. So he was trying to hurt her. And even when she moved, she has had to learn to live with this.
So he was jealous? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, totally jealous. He was very controlling when he was alive. He's one of them that the wife couldn't go to the store, that he did not, quiz her, and all that stuff. So in death, he didn't want to let go of her either.
So his ghost now, you're saying, is so powerful that he basically kept the priests out, he kept the nuns out, and he's taunting this person in real life?
Yes. Now, it has gotten better. She did come into where I work not that long ago, and we talked about it. But they did something where they were able to get a demonologist in there. And he had a priest with him that worked in just that field, so he could get in places like that. And they told her, they did some kind of stuff to the house and everything, but they told him that he was one that they couldn't get completely away, but they could keep it down. She has to perform sage and a lot of other stuff like every month, and she'll have to do that the rest of her life, no matter where she lives.
You know, it's funny. I heard that too, and I had a client that bought a house before, and they're like, "We're thinking we're see stuff or feel stuff, but we never seen anything." So I got them like this sage candle and took it to them.
Well, I also learned now about that sage and candle. Anybody out there listening, that sage period, you can also really, really upset them.
With sage?
If it's a demon, yeah, the sage will just literally piss them off, is the only way I can say it. And they will come back at you twice-fold. So you be real careful with the saging, anybody, and until somebody that does this, like the paranormal people, tell you to. Don't just go out and buy that stuff and do it on your own.
I wonder why that is. That's so interesting.
I don't really know. That's why I watch all this stuff. I'm trying to learn. But yeah,
I figure it out.
And don't have a Ouija board ever in your house. Ever. It predicted my girlfriend's death. We thought it was just a joke, and 2 weeks later, she was killed in the car with everybody in the car. And my mother went nuts. She took it out there and buried it in the backyard and everything else, and nothing like that's even allowed in my house.
You know, I got to tell you that, and I swear, I think that children see stuff that adults don't see. I mean, I really believe that.
Absolutely.
And you know us. You've known our family since we've been born. But so my youngest daughter, Adelisa, there was a couple times. One time she had to go to the bathroom. The child always has to use the bathroom. So we pull up and we're outside of Sonic and we run in. She's probably about 4, maybe 5 years old at the time. She's 8 now. So we go and we park out front and we're like, gosh, she's taking a long time. We're waiting outside. It's been like more than 5 minutes. We're like, what is she doing in there? So I go and I knock on the door and I'm like, Adelisa, come on, what are you doing? And so I hear her in there talking away. Finally, she unlocks the door and I said, come on, wash your hands. What are you doing? Let's go. She goes, oh, Mommy, I was just talking to the lady. I said, what lady? What are you talking about? She goes, the lady that was in here. She's nice. She was just talking to me and just went on and on and on about that. I'm like, what does she talk about? Just this whole conversation that she had with somebody that wasn't in the bathroom.
Absolutely. They show that a lot. And my youngest daughter, who's in her 40s now, when she was about 4 years old, we kept hearing her talk in the bedroom. We couldn't figure out why. And we stood there and listened. And she was having a conversation, answering somebody something. So we walked in and asked her who she was talking to, and she said, an angel, Mommy. There's an angel right over there. We didn't see nothing, but she did, and she did it for a long time.
The interesting thing, too, is probably, I would say, within the last couple weeks, my little daughter, the same one, that she's 8 now, we were out showing property, and it gets dark kind of early now.
Right.
And it was kind of hard to see the street signs because it was really dark, and we were headed to the last property. I had to call the owner and go, hey, is the power still on? You know, because it was that dark. So we were just trying to finish up and get to the last property. Well, I had actually missed the street I was supposed to turn on, and so the street it was on was just a cul-de-sac, so it was a little dead-end road, and, you know, straight ahead of the cul-de-sac was just like some woods, and there was houses on both sides of the street and the rest of the cul-de-sac. And so I went in and just kind of turned around and made a circle. And my daughter was like, Mommy, did you see that man? Mommy. And she's like steady talking. I think it was on the phone or something, or I don't even know. I wasn't paying attention. She goes, Mommy, that man was looking at me. I said, what are you talking about? So at this point, we've already turned around and we're headed towards the last house. She goes, Mommy, the man with the cane and the hat was just standing there looking at me.
See, they do see things, and they never know what year of age. They've had older children they show on TV. They've just now started a new show of children that are reborn again into this life, and a couple of them was from the 911 explosion thing. They experienced falling to their death and everything. Now, that's really creepy. Those kids really, really suffer until they figure it out. But, yes.
It was just interesting. I asked her, I said, well, who was it? Should we go back and see if he's there? She goes, no.
It scared her. See? So it has to be
I was like, well, was
bad.
he real? Or like, I don't know. And I said,
they'll appear as nice things or another child to kids, and it's really a demon. So you have to be really careful and watch where those little conversations go to. So, and as it was, mine just stopped doing it, so I figured it was somebody good, possibly her grandmother, you know. And she never had bad dreams or anything like that. But it has showed a lot of kids where they could get through to a child quicker because they're so vulnerable. They're so innocent.
It's so interesting how these, conversations can go, and it's, whether you believe in ghost stories or not, or you're just having fun with our show today. It's been super exciting to share the experience. I appreciate you joining us for the show today, Barb.
Thank you so much, honey, because everybody makes fun of me. You didn't make fun of me. I believe in this.
Well, like I was saying before you came on, if I didn't see something myself when I was a kid, I don't know that I would believe in it.
Exactly.
Because I think stuff just kind of, you just chalk it off as, yeah, whatever. I'm just psyching myself out or I'm seeing stuff.
All right, sweetheart.
All right, you're listening to Tampa Home Talk. I'm your host, Katrina Madewell. We have to take a very quick break, but we'll be back in a minute.
You're buying a house. Congratulations. So while you're worrying about the paperwork, leave the moving part to us. We're Woody & Sons Moving Company, a Florida licensed and insured mover, and we offer same-day written estimates. Plus, no sneaky mileage, stairs, or additional stop fees. All we ask is that you check out our great ratings on Google and Angie's List, then go to woodyandsons.com to learn more. Whether you need a full service pack and move, or some extra hands, at Woody & Sons Moving Company, we move you.
Welcome back. You're listening to Tampa Home Talk. This is our special Halloween edition. And so, fantastic show we've had today. If you missed it, you're going to want to check out the whole thing. I think I say that every week, but this is one you got to listen to. So you can catch us on Facebook and on Twitter. Just look for Tampa Home Talk. We're also at tampahometalk.com, and all of our shows are available on a podcast. So Roy Condrey, he's the CEO of dininghouse.com. We talked a little bit about why he started that company at the earlier part of the show. And then we had another guest call in, Barb, to share some of her experiences with the ghostly paranormal, if you will. And I'm trying to think where we left off there, Roy.
Well, I was just giving you, there's a paranormal reason why our company is there, because people believe in paranormal. But I was also giving you other reasons. There's the people that don't necessarily believe, but there's reasons why they would want this information. One being the home value, also their home could be a tourist site, and just to have the negative history, because there's like the feng shui community and all that.
I never thought about the tourist site access, but aspect of it. I just never thought about that.
Yeah, I consolidated a few stories the other day where it was the like I mentioned earlier, the Travis Alexander house. Also, Amityville, that's a big one. So you go on YouTube and find people just scoping that out and putting the video up. But
you always think that stuff is not real because there was a movie on that, I think.
Right, but it was a true story. For sure, there was a family of 6 murdered there by the older brother, back in the 70s. But also, the original owner died in that house. So there were 7 people that died in that house.
So people just drive by the house all the time?
Yeah, I would guess so. It's a tourist attraction. All these movies are based off of true stories. Psycho is based off of a true story.
Like Sinister.
Conjuring. All these. They're elaborated, of course, but based off of people's true experiences in these homes.
So just to kind of recap real quick, some of the reasons why people would want to get their dininghouse.com report would be, A, they don't want to have paranormal. They don't want to have a house that's later a tourist attraction or a circus attraction. And what were some of the other reasons?
It could impact the home's value.
Home's value.
So, all right. So I told you that guy Randall Bell, the appraiser in California. He said it could impact the value up to 25% or more, and take it 50% longer to sell than comparable homes. So, just look at the famous homes. You go online, you can see, the mansion that Michael Jackson was renting was also for sale, like $28 million or what have you, and it ended up selling after his death for $19 million. And same for Kurt Cobain's home and Nicole Brown Simpson's, and it's all the famous homes. So if it happens even at the larger scale, it happens at the lower level markets also.
So you're saying that basically the house set for a while and then later they get resold? Because I don't follow those. A lot of those are in different markets.
Yeah, a lot of times so what happens? This is what I see. The incident happens. If murder-suicide occurs, and everyone in that town, a lot of people know this happens, especially in that area. The house goes up for sale. Of course, they try to sell it for the comparable value, and that just keeps tearing down. sometimes an unsuspecting buyer comes in, maybe from out of town, and buys it. So in September, there was a story that it was in Phoenix, Arizona, where 7 months earlier, it was a townhome. The guy on one side, the dogs were barking his neighbor's dogs were barking. He flips out. He goes next door, kills both the dogs. Like the father and son comes out, he kills them. He goes in the house, kills the mother and daughter, kills a family of 4 and their 2 dogs. Goes back to his side, kills himself. They end up selling this townhome to a lady and her daughters 7 months later, and not disclosing it. She moves in and she finds out instantly from neighbors that this happened. Now she's uncomfortable and she lawyered up and she's trying to get out of this. But there's tons of stories. Even renters. Back in August, there was this big story, ABC, and everyone was covering it, where a lady was sitting in Ferguson, Missouri, in her home. Her friend calls her and says, "Turn the TV on." Like A&E was doing a documentary or something on the serial killer. And the guy he tortured and murdered like up to 20 women down in the basement of his home, and he videotaped a lot of it. And they were showing some of it on TV, and she was sitting right there. Furniture, the house was renting to her. So basically, the serial killer's mother owns a house, and she's renting it out and not telling everybody its history. So this lady, cared so much. The landlord wasn't going to give her back her deposit or anything until there was some pressure. But she said, "I'm moving out either way. Give me the deposit or not." But once she got the press behind her, the landlord got her out of the deal.
So you probably experience a lot more of this stuff than I do. But have you had any people or like clients of yours that have bought a home that later stumbled across your site and were like, "Wow, I wish I would have got that report," that have experienced seeing things or encountering anything in the house?
Yeah, well, that story, the one in Arizona, we weren't informed. They wrote that story afterwards, and they included us, and they said they ran a report, and we did find that information. So she was saying if you ran that report, you would have got that history.
So she bought the house and then later ran the report?
Well, she bought the house. And then the news got story of it, and the news did the story, but they went and ran the report on that property and found the information. So they wrote a whole story about her, what happened to her and us. They kind of coupled the story together, but the information was in our database. But yeah, so when I started this, I told you that I found out that a married couple died in another property of mine. And
now, do you know, were they brutally murdered, or was it just died in their sleep kind of death, or do you know?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask me that. So there's a law. I'm going to put this in 2 ways, so I'm not disclosing it. There's a law stating if people die of HIV, you're not supposed to tell them they died of HIV, okay? So I'm not going to tell you how the married couple died in this property. I'm going to tell you there's a law stating that they're allowed to get that information out. So this couple died in the property, and now that I'm in this business, I need to tell. I claim to be a very ethical person, so I need to tell my tenants, "Hey, I'm in this business. A married couple died in your property." And the male, the man, he was pretty cool with it. He says, "Oh, well, my wife might creep out a little bit." So he told her. And I came, and when they moved out, I went over there and talked with them. And I asked them, I said, well, before that, we're on the phone. I was on the phone, and I disclosed it to him. And I asked him, I said, at the end of the conversation, I said, "Hey, by the way, have you seen anything? Are you experiencing anything?" He goes, "Well, by the way, in that front room, they have this computer, and something would catch his eye over by the door." And it happened to him a few times. And he didn't want to bring it up to his wife. But then one day, his wife brought it up to him. So she was experiencing the same thing. That's what he told me over the phone. But then when I went and got the keys when they moved out a year later, I asked them about it, and they said, yeah, they'll sit there and they'll see like a shadow, they explained, moving across from one room to the other.
So they would initially catch stuff out of the corner of their eye, and then later, I guess after the spirit got settled with them, they would see them?
Yeah, they told me it was like a shadow, and they said it wasn't fast, it was slow moving. I was like, okay. But I'll tell you what, I've never seen it. All I can tell you is from the day I bought that home, I had a creepy feeling in there. That's before even finding out there was people that died in that house.
And this was an investment property for you?
Yes, investment property.
It's interesting how some of these stories can come about. We're going to take a real quick break here on Tampa Home Talk, and we'll be back in just a minute, and we'll wrap up the rest of our story with special promotions that Roy has offered our Tampa Home Talk customers, and we'll be back in just a minute.
You've heard this before. Interest rates are at all-time record lows. But if your interest rate is 4% or above, you owe it to yourself to call Silverton Mortgage Specialist. Silverton is a direct lender, and the best part about this is that the entire loan process is handled in-house. From application to close, we do it all in the same building, which means that our loans close fast and our clients know what's going on every step of the way. Our contact info is located on TampaHometalk.com under Radio Show. What makes Silverton different? Products. We offer VA, FHA, USDA, and conventional loans pricing. Best rates with the lowest closing cost. Process everything in-house. It's handled right here and not outsourced to anyone that no one can reach. This way we can avoid surprises. Our people are simply the best, and we know you'll agree. What will closing Silverton Mortgage Specialist mean to you? A smooth process, real home loan value, and personal attention from real professionals. Silverton Mortgage Specialists are here to serve you. Visit TampaHometalk.com under Radio Show for all of our contact details. NMLS 109600 is an equal housing lender and Florida and Georgia residential mortgage licensee.
Aaron Davis here, owner of Hillsborough Title, serving all of Tampa Bay. Our service strength and knowledge make us different. From Polk County to the Gulf, Pasco to Manatee, Tampa Bay, we've got you covered. Visit us on the web at thebesttitle.com. That's thebesttitle.com.
Welcome back. You're listening to this week's Halloween edition of Tampa Home Talk. Thank you so much for rejoining us. We've had all kinds of fun little ghostly, paranormal, oddly things, all types of stories that we've shared with you this week on Tampa Home Talk. If you missed any part of it, you'll want to check it out. All of our shows are available on a podcast. You can also catch us at TampaHometalk.com and across the web on Facebook and Twitter at Tampa Home Talk. We have Roy Condrey. He's the president of DiedInHouse.com. And we were just talking about some of the different stories. And their company basically prepares a report for anyone that has passed away in a property. So if a buyer is looking to do some due diligence, they want to know if there was ever a murder or suicide or anyone that died in the property, they can pull this report up and get all this information on it. And we have a special for our Tampa Home Talk listeners, but if you stick around, we'll give you that in just a few. If you miss it and you can't listen, or you're maybe getting out of the car, just pop on over to Tampa Home Talk later, and we're going to post it there. So, Roy, we were talking a little bit during the break and just sharing some of the reasons why someone would want to get the report or know this information if someone has passed on in a house. But you brought up an interesting topic over the break when you were talking about connecting with some of the trauma cleanup companies. That is a very interesting topic of discussion, probably a great one to share for the last part of our show.
Right. When we launched and some press was written on us, I had some trauma cleanup companies contact me, the CEOs, and they're telling me they're glad we're providing the service, because their job is to come in and, clean up a home after a tragic event happens, like a suicide or what have you. And they just know that time and time again this happens, and the owners of those homes just pass that house off to the buyer and not telling them the history. And
so who's hiring the trauma cleanup companies? Are you finding that most of the time they go back to the bank and the bank's hiring them?
I really don't know who hires them. I was just presuming it would be the
heirs,
or the heirs, or whoever is responsible for taking care of their business for them. I'm sure they don't want to deal with it, but yeah, whoever's hiring them, these companies come in and clean up what's left behind, and so
they're going in, they're cleaning up bodies, they're cleaning up blood, right? I mean, they're probably replacing carpet, painting walls.
Right. Well, that Jody, that I keep going back to the Travis Alexander house. In the article I read there, the people believe they bought it as is. Now, the bathroom was cleaned, but it was like carpet cut out and wherever into the hallway, it was just demolished. And they didn't stop to ask why it was that way. It was an as-is property. Ends up being one of the biggest stories here in the last few years.
Which house was that again?
Travis Alexander, the one Jody Harris's boyfriend that she murdered.
Okay.
brutally murdered that guy.
The interesting part is, and it's different, obviously, for every market. I'm sure it's different where you are in South Carolina. It's different here. But I can tell you right now, just because of competitiveness alone in our market, right now, I don't know pretty much any buyer or seller that is not writing an offer on an as-is contract. And it's just because that means, hey, the seller doesn't want to have to go back in and renegotiate for any type of repairs later or anything like that. But if they get their due diligence period, their inspection period, so my suggestion as an agent, if you were interested in something like this or you wanted to get this report, do it during your inspection period because that's your time to do your due diligence.
Right. Well, that house I have, it was an as-is. And you mentioned it earlier. When you're looking at these properties, no matter if it's an investment or you're going to live in it, you're on a high. You're not thinking of the history. You're thinking of, as an investor, how can I get this back on the market, or get a tenant in it. And as a buyer, you're looking, I can bring the grandkids and they can live down this room and what have you, So you're on a high. It's not until after you into these properties where you think about this, usually.
And so you're the one that you said your husband and wife died in the property you have. Do you have to rent that property for less than you normally would?
No, I don't. I don't rent it for less, and I do disclose the information.
And so
I think that the attraction with my property, it does take a little time. The attraction with mine is I have hardwoods and I allow pets, and there's no deposit, so I'm kind of flexible here. It's a give-take type situation.
Right. The interesting part about what I was mentioning, and really the best time for a buyer to do their due diligence if it is something of concern, and for example, they could get your report at, for dininghouse.com, is do that during the inspection period. So obviously the time period that you guys would have to return the report would be pretty important to a buyer.
Right. So how the report works is you run it, you get an instant report. So it goes through our algorithm that we created, and it hits our database, and it gives you instant information. Did someone die in the house, yes or no? If yes, here's the information. But we also provide a list of everyone we can find in public records and certain private databases who's associated to that address. And then out of that list, we tell you who's been reported as deceased. Because we're not always going to find the death in a home. You may know someone died there. It's just that there's no record for us to find, digitally.
It's a hard thing to trace.
It is. It definitely is. So we provide that information, and then what happens is that address queues up in our system, and our operational staff will do some more research. If we find any additional information, we will contact you immediately. Then, in 30 days, we rerun that address to the system and provide you a follow-up report. I know it's a 30-day period, but the reason we do that is because someone could pass away, that report, there's no time limit. It depends. You never know when it's going to be written and when it's going to be released. So we just give it a 30-day period.
We have a special that you have so generously provided to our listeners and our clients over at Tampa Home Talk. And so what's your promo code is Home Talk, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I greatly appreciate you having me on the show. So we created a promo code Home Talk, and it will be $3 off of any report on our site.
And real quick, because I think we have just like 30 seconds left, you guys offer a one-time report. If someone's going to be looking, they want to pull it on multiple properties, they can do that, and it gets cheaper.
Right. The more reports you buy, the cheaper it gets per report. Exactly.
Interesting stuff. You're listening to Tampa Home Talk. Roy Condrey has been our guest today with dininghouse.com. I really thank you so much for participating in our Halloween edition of today's show.
I greatly appreciate you having me on.
And thank you so much for joining us for today's show. For this week, we're out.
Strange in your neighborhood.